So, welcome to this very special edition of Harmonious World, celebrating the 6th anniversary. My name is Hilary Seabrook. Award-winning violinist Ariana Kim has a absolutely brilliant album out called Uncommon Thread, exploring improvisation from Mozart to Macedonia. Comes out in a few days after I'm recording this, but it'll be out now when you're listening. So the album juxtaposes Mozart's Sonata in B-flat major, Beethoven's Sonata in E-flat major, and then original works by Kim herself and percussionist composer Shane Shanahan, as well as traditional music from around the globe. This is a really, really interesting and it's a lovely album. And it's lovely to hear improvisation on the violin. What you're listening to now is Ariana Kim's improvisation on Bahudari. It's a Carnatic raga from South India. The album then leaps into the 21st century with Kim on steel-stringed violin and Shanahan on percussion. So I've got lots to talk to Ariana about. Hello.
Excellent. Hi, thank you for meeting with me. It's so exciting to chat with you.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting to chat. This album is incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, Uncommon Thread.
That's right.
And I've only recently really got into listening to violinists improvising.
Mm.
And it is a very special thing. I think it's because I was trained as a classical musician. And so I'm used to hearing the violin. And then to hear it in a very different way is absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I also was trained classically, and though I spent my summers doing a lot of folk music and bluegrass and Americana, which has many roots in improvisation, I was still, the majority of my training, the majority of my musical upbringing was, you observe the score as doctrine and um, you even think about, okay, did he mean, was that a dash or was it a dot or was it a caret, when you're looking at manuscripts and things. Um, and then as I became more curious about it, I started to, recognize actually Mozart and Beethoven were the greatest improvisers, in the beginning. And what they eventually put down on paper was once improvised. So how do we think about that in the context of improvisation, but with the integrity and the intention and the education of having toiled in those crafts and in those languages, so that when you take an embellishment or you take a cadenza in one of those pieces, it's in keeping with the tradition. And likewise with the world music that I've been exploring, which sort of each has their own flavor.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, what made you decide to do this album where you look at Mozart and Beethoven and then you go into India and you go around Europe and you go all over the world?
Yeah.
So what was the spark that got this album going?
It was a little bit multifaceted, in fact. At that time, this album is many years in the making now. I started to explore this space about 10 years ago. And it was originally sparked by my work with actually both Shane and Roger, my two collaborators. Roger Mosley, who's a phenomenal forte pianist, musicologist, scholar, um, and then Shane, who is a brilliant percussionist, one of the founding members of the Silk Road Ensemble. And both of them had such thoughtfulness and integrity with how they approached music. And at the time, I had been sort of exploring different world musics via composers that I was working with my quartet, with the Knights, which is another ensemble I play with here in New York, and some other sort of independent projects that I had been working on. And Shane and I crossed paths during that chapter, and we played a piece together that had a lot of improvisation sort of built into it. And so he would play a lick and chuck it to me, and I would play a lick and chuck it to the bassist, and so on and so forth. and that sort of whetted my appetite for what's possible, particularly in a live setting. And so I started playing around more with exploring music in uh, in different traditions from India, different traditions from Macedonia, Bulgaria. And then on the flip side, Roger had said, what would you think about exploring these historical keyboards? We have a beautiful historical keyboard center at Cornell, and we have sort of going back to the earliest harpsichords to Moog synthesizers. We have kind of the whole span of historical keyboards, and we thought, how fun would it be to explore Mozart and Beethoven on the pianos that were on, or at least on replicas of pianos that were used during that time? And then began our sort of relationship with Malcolm Bilson, who's a brilliant forte pianist and an improviser in his own right. Um, and then we said, okay, let's pick a couple of pieces and just start playing. So it started sort of as a sight reading, let's have fun activity. And then we decided to put together a concert, and I asked Shane if he had any pieces that would work for violin and percussion. And then came Audacity, Oilfield Fires, and Kanda Jog, and then birthed this sort of unexpected program of looking at what happens when you immerse yourself. At that point, it was called immersion, and what happens if you immerse yourself in these different styles and different types of music, but within the context of improvisation and thinking about improvisation. So yeah, it sort of came from many different angles, but inspired by exploration, freedom, creativity, spontaneity. Yeah.
It's a wonderful collection of pieces that, we can't even get in having a conversation like this. I can't even get close to talking
Mhm.
about, that spread, but it's quite amazing. The
Mhm.
I went to Beethoven's home in Austria,
Mhm.
and it was amazing to see, where he lived
Mhm.
and worked. And
Mhm.
it's clear that he spent a lot of time just playing the piano and then deciding, he would go for a lot of
Yeah.
walks. This part of Vienna he lived in was out on the sort of outskirts, and
Right.
he would go for lots of walks in the countryside and
Yeah.
come back and then just play something that had occurred to him during that. And that
Exactly.
improvisation is not what we normally think of for Beethoven and Mozart, but that's how they started.
Exactly. And that's one of the notes I made in when I was writing the liner notes. One of the things I said, everything's improvised until it's written down. And that, with the Mozart in particular, that piece wasn't finished at the premiere. Mozart was behind schedule. And so, from our understanding, he had written out the violin part but hadn't finished the piano part. So, at the premiere, at, um, at which apparently the emperor was, um, he just opened up what looked like a score, but it ended up being just blank sheets of paper on the inside. And the emperor caught wind of it because I guess he was to the side of the stage enough that he caught a glimpse of what was actually happening, and Mozart was actually caught red-handed, but no one would have known, no one was the wiser because he was such a brilliant improviser and he had such a clear idea of the structure and what was happening harmonically that even if what ended up being written down eventually wasn't what happened at the premiere, the structure, the architecture, the intention, the energy of all of the sort of sections and movements came through. So
Yeah, and when you think that when they were writing, there was no recording, there was no way to record
exactly.
it. I
Nobody
mean,
knew. Nobody knows what happened. Yeah.
no. And so to then, going away and kind of going, oh yes, well, I'm going to write it down. He can't possibly, I mean, he probably came very close, but he can't possibly have written exactly what he played at that point.
Exactly.
So again, there was another stage of improvisation.
Exactly.
How
Exactly.
wonderful.
And so that was our launch pad for that piece specifically because we thought, well, he didn't even write it down until later. So what might it be like if he took that same phrase but put it in triplets? Or what if he took those eighth notes and made them quarters? What if instead of a scale, he did an arpeggio? What if instead of a dotted rhythm, it was a straight rhythm? So that was sort of our launch pad, but always trying to be approaching it with integrity to think about his language and his voice.
Yeah. Am I right? I read somewhere, I think in the liner notes, that you had to tune your violin down because of the the way the pianos were in those days.
That's right. So we tuned these particular forte pianos, which are from around this time period, the late 1700s, early 1800s. They're sort of happiest around 425 or 430, which is 10 or 15 cents lower than where we typically play today. Um, and then I also wound my violin with wound gut strings, and so you have this sort of timbral interchange that's different from a steel string violin with a Steinway. The wound gut strings, they're not 100% gut. They're gut on the core, but then in the core, but then they have a slight winding of sometimes aluminum, sometimes gold, sometimes steel, so that it has a little more structure. Gut strings are very, very hard to keep in tune, so that was one of the inspirations. But the wound gut still gives you sort of that warmer quality, and it matches the wood of the forte piano better. You don't have that giant steel frame of the Steinway. Um, so by tuning down and by putting wound gut strings on the violin, it gave us also a different sense of improvisation in like a timbral from a timbral perspective. So we were thinking about like how do we use this. There's less tension on the violin with the gut and with the lower tuning. So, like, what does it mean for us to embrace that? Does it give us more time at this fermata? Does it give us more space to expand and take a risk in this moment? And then to allow those two instruments to really kind of talk to each other, um, it really it seemed to fit the timbre of the piano to allow it to kind of resonate at 430. We were tuned to 430 for the record. And then the violin just sort of settled into it with the piano, and it came out to be a really nice pairing.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I don't think many people have got the time to sort of compare it, to compare
Mm,
your recording with somebody else's. And I think in
sure.
some ways that's not what we do. We just listen to them for their own sake.
Mm,
But there's certainly something very interesting about that resonance between the two instruments.
I agree. I agree. We're doing an album release party here on Tuesday when the album drops, and we'll be playing a lot of the album live. We'll be playing sort of selections from each section of the record, and we'll be bringing in a forte piano and tuning everything down. So it'll be curious to see how there'll be a lot of musicians in the audience, and many of them who are playing, modern instruments and modern tuning. So it'll be interesting to see how people feel in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, because I can imagine that. I mean, I'm not fortunate enough to have perfect pitch, but I can imagine that people that do have perfect pitch, that's quite disconcerting, I should imagine.
It is really hard. I do have it, but in many ways it can be a curse
Yeah.
because it is difficult, especially if I have to play at 415, because 415 is a true half step low compared to what we're used to at a 440A. So what happens to me when I have to play at 415, I see one thing with my eyes and then I hear a different thing that's coming out of the instrument, and so my hand subconsciously does things that's unintentionally trying to correct what I see to be what's
Yeah.
coming out of the instrument. So in that way, it is difficult. And when I play at 430, I do have to sort of bring myself down over a few days. Like I'll tune down today and bring my violin down for the Tuesday concert because it does take time to just sort of 430 can still resonate. I've done it enough that it can still resonate as an A for me, but it just everything sort of feels like it's doing this. And I don't know if people are probably going to be listening to this and not watching it, but it sort of feels like your whole body just sort of shimmies down a few inches, which is it's a great tool. It's a great exercise. And in that way too, you have to kind of give yourself over to the resonance and the sonority of the forte piano because it kind of invites you in to be sitting a little bit lower in the pitch. So,
Yeah. So for those people who are listening to this who aren't musicians, it's like when you hear a song that you are familiar with a particular artist singing, and then you go and see somebody else singing and they can't get it in that pitch, they have to have it slightly lower. It's like that, isn't it? Where there's something different and you can't quite work out what it is.
right. So when something it might be transposed
Yeah.
in a pop concert
Yeah.
or even when back in the olden days when we had records and and it was spinning maybe slightly slower. So it's still the same song, still the same recording, but it maybe is a half step lower than one is used to. And the revolutions aren't slow enough that it feels wrong. but you
Yeah.
can tell, oh, something's not quite the same. Yeah.
Yeah. But isn't that a
Yeah.
wonderful thing about music that that those subtle changes in the physics
Mm. Mm.
make all the difference? And sometimes that can be a really positive thing, as I think it is in this case. I think it's
Exactly.
really interesting. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, so we move on to the 21st century. What
Yeah.
I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to play an extract from Oilfield Fires by Shane Shanahan. So Shane is a percussionist.
Right.
How much of what you play is composed by him and how much of it is completely improvised?
So we have what he and a lot of sort of jazz and or percussionists call a chart, where you have generally a melody and sort of a few sections after that that kind of show you, here's the material that we're going to work with. And then from there, we'll sort of decide a roadmap of, okay, let's repeat the first section 2 times. Let's repeat the B section once. Let's repeat the last section 4 times. And sometimes that's even notated in his score. But then each one of us takes sort of liberties and improvisations where he'll continue with a groove and then I take a melodic improvisation, or I play a groove and he plays a percussive improvisation. So sometimes there are sort of longer, extended, almost jazz style cadenzas, and then there'll be more opportunities kind of within the chart, within the structure, within the tune or the melody, to add embellishments, to add double stops, to add ornaments kind of within the style of the piece. So not too unlike the sort of general idea of how you might do it in a classical piece, but of course then the language is different. So
Yeah, yeah. He's a wonderful he's a wonderful composer, isn't he?
he's a wonderful everything. He's a wonderful composer, musician, human, citizen. He's just yeah, he's a delight kind of across the board. So
Yeah. So how long have you been working with him?
it's been now probably 12 or 13 years. I think we met, yeah, probably 12 or 13 years ago. And then we started putting this project together and working together in various contexts about 10 years ago, I think.
Right. And so you said you've got an album launch coming up next week because that's the when the album when the album comes out.
That's right.
Yeah. So are you doing bits from both sides, if you like, of the album?
Yeah, so we've done already some preview performances. We did one at Cornell. We did one in Minneapolis, which is my hometown. And then this will be sort of our final one in New York City when the album officially launches on Tuesday. And it'll be at this point yet to be finalized, but I think this is how we're going to structure it. It'll be an interspersing. So on the album, it's sort of an A side, B side, so that you sort of live in the world uh, of late 18th century violin sonatas, and then you switch gears almost entirely, and you live in the world um, of improvised folk music, Indian music, Macedonian, Bulgarian, and Shane's compositions. But it's also quite curious. We did it this way in Minneapolis, where you do a movement of Mozart and then a Carnatic raga, and then a movement of Beethoven and Oilfield Fires, and then another movement of Mozart and the Bulgarian folk dance. So I think that's how we'll structure it, and so people will get kind of a tasting menu of the whole record.
Yeah, because you can't play the whole thing, and also, they can sit at home and watch and listen to the whole thing, can't they?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Fantastic. So this has taken you 10 years. What's next?
It's a good question. I've been exploring a number of thoughts. I've had the chance, as you probably saw, and the inspiration behind Bahudari, which is the Carnatic raga, to go live half a year in India and study deeply the Carnatic style. Um, I've been thinking similarly about maybe an excursion to Scandinavia, primarily Norway, to dive into the Hardanger fiddle, which I'm really curious about and would love to do. I also have dreams of doing another excursion down to Argentina and explore the tango world and learn how to be a better tango fiddler. So hopefully, sort of folk traditions in different parts of the world. Um, as a sort of sabbatical project, and that may take shape in a forthcoming album. And then currently, I'm doing a sort of a long series of solo recital tours where I'm putting together Bach patchwork quilts that I sort of lovingly call them patchwork quilts, where it's 100% Bach, but I'm improvising, sort of sewing different movements together. Some new works by colleagues and friends of mine, George Meyer and Jesse Montgomery. And then there is some Chen Yi and John Harbison, sort of sewing these, bringing different worlds of the solo violin together in recital tours. And yeah, I'll be playing the Mendelssohn D minor concerto in about a month, which is the other Mendelssohn concerto, with the Milan Chamber Orchestra in Italy. I've got a festival there, and then some chamber music projects later in the summer, and we'll sort of see what happens from there.
Yeah, fantastic. Hearing about your Bach work, I've recently got into there's a British pianist called Neil Cowley who's got a
Mm,
trio, and he's just
mm,
brought an album out called Built on Bach, where
mm,
they take all of the Bach of and then they improvise around it. So sometimes
mm.
you've got no idea what inspired it, but it's just great jazz. And then other
Mm.
times it'll be like, whoa, that's a bit of Bach just came
Yeah,
right at you. So it's really fascinating. There's so much, isn't there, that Bach it's not dead music, you know.
not at all. It's so, I mean, there's sometimes I hear a harmony that Bach chose and I think, what?
Yeah.
It feels just as fresh as yesterday. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, listen, it's been such a pleasure talking to you,
Thank
Ariana.
you.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was a great conversation. It was such a pleasure to talk to Ariana. And what you're listening to now is Migrating Home, which she actually composed. She's obviously a very busy, very much in demand violinist around the world. So if you get a chance to see her, then please do. I'll put all the links in the show notes so that you can check out where she's going to be. If you're in New York, you should definitely get to some of the gigs around the release of Uncommon Thread. Thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.